What's up everybody, my name is Phosphorus and I welcome you to the patch 9.2.5 Kyrian Arcane Mage guide. As you may already know, Arcane was just very recently hit with some buffs to Arcane Blast and Arcane Missiles, which totals out to about a 6% increase in our damage. This also causes some changes to our rotation, which we'll be going over shortly. Also very recently, it's been discovered that Harmonic Echo was not being counted towards Touch of the Magi damage. So this means that in some cases, we will actually be spellqueuing our barrage again. We'll discuss all of that and more later, but first, let's discuss our legendaries. As usual, our best legendary for both single target and AoE situations will be Arcane Harmony. You can pick this up in either your shoulder or hand slot. Of course, next we'll be crafting our second legendary, Harmonic Echo. You can craft this as best in slot for your waist, on a ring if you plan on multi-speccing, or your worst slot that doesn't interfere with tier pieces. All of our legendaries will be crafted with Critical Strike and Mastery. Next we'll be discussing Soulbinds. I recommend using Pelagos in all content, whether that's Raid or Mythic Plus. Now, there is a use case for Mechanicos in Mythic Plus where you can take advantage of his final conduit that can reduce the cooldown of Radiant Spark whenever you hit 5 or more targets. The idea behind this is that you cast a single Radiant Spark in between your burns, and the cooldown reduction from the conduit would allow Radiant Spark to still line up with your next burn. On paper this sounds good, but in practice, a lot of things need to line up for you to capitalize on the benefits, which is why I would recommend just using Pelagos. If you do want to try out Mechanicos though, here's the Soulbind tree I use. Moving on to talents, you'll want to take Amplification, Shimmer or Slipstream depending on preference, Rune of Power, and then Arcane Echo on pure single target encounters, or Resonance on 2 or more targets. We then take Chrono Shift, Arcane Orb, and Overpowered. As for our stats, you'll always want to make sure you're simming your character on raid bots to make sure you're making the best decisions based on your currently available gear. However, this is what my stats are currently looking like. In general, how much of each stat raid bots gravitates towards will heavily depend on your current trinket setup. You'll notice I have a high amount of haste, and this is because I'm running a Moonlit Prism which likes haste in order to build stacks from arcane missiles quickly. I also have a higher amount of crit since I'm not running a Soul Lighting Ruby and I still want to have a good chance of critting my Arcane Barrage. I also pair an Unbound Changeling with this that can proc crit for me. Another trinket setup I'll use is a double on-use setup with First Sigil and a Soul Lighting Ruby. I'll be running a bit less haste here, but still a generally high amount of crit. Here's a list of trinket combinations that work pretty well together. Now if you're already familiar with Kyrian Arcane's damage pattern, you can skip this chapter, but I'll be quickly going over it so any newcomers to the spec can understand the terminology. Kyrian Arcane has a very ebb and flow style to its damage pattern. About every 45 seconds you'll have a big burn with arcane power, followed by a period of low filler damage, into a mini burn, followed by another period of low filler damage, and then the cycle repeats. Now before I begin talking about rotations, keep in mind I'm assuming you already have 4-set and double legendaries equipped. With that said, let's get into the single target rotation. 15 seconds before the pull starts, you want to be spamming Arcane Explosion to fish for a clearcasting proc. You want to keep using Arcane Explosion until you either get a clearcasting proc, or there's 8 seconds left until the pull starts. At 8 seconds, you want to sit down and eat mage food to replenish mana. Then, 3 seconds before the pull, you want to cast Rune of Power into an Arcane Blast precast. We precast this Arcane Blast just so we can expend a bit more mana to potentially get a second clearcasting stack on pull. The pull has now begun and we're going to begin our AP burn opener. Spam Arcane Missiles until you have 18 stacks of Arcane Harmony, then cast Radiant Spark into Touch of the Magi into Arcane Power. We're then going to cast 4 Arcane Blasts, and the 5th Arcane Blast is going to have an Arcane Barrage spell queued into it. If you're not sure what it means to spell queue, I'll have an explanation of it down in the description. After casting that Arcane Barrage, you're now at 0 stacks of Arcane Harmony, 0 Arcane Charges, and should have about 4 seconds left on your Touch of the Magi. You want to shoot out an Arcane Orb, followed by Presence of Mind, and you'll be following a simple priority list. Use any clearcasting missiles you have, use your instant cast Presence of Mind Arcane Blasts, or use regular Arcane Missiles until Touch of the Magi drops. Now while we wait for Rune of Power, Radiant Spark, and Touch of the Magi to come back off cooldown, we'll be moving into our filler rotation. Our filler rotation will consist of building up 18 stacks of Arcane Harmony and dumping with Arcane Barrage at 4 Arcane Charges, However, there are some rules you need to follow. You never want to cast Arcane Barrage unless you have both 15 to 18 stacks of Arcane Harmony and 4 Arcane Charges. You also never want to hardcast Arcane Blast unless you have 2 or more Arcane Charges. This means that your filler rotation will follow a simple priority list. Arcane Barrage when you have both 18 stacks of Arcane Harmony and 4 Arcane Charges, Arcane Orb when you have 0 Arcane Charges, Arcane Blast when you have at least 2 Arcane Charges, and lastly, cast Arcane Missiles. Once Rune of Power, Radiant Spark, and Touch of the Magi are back off cooldown, you can enter your mini burn phase. Make sure you have 18 stacks of Arcane Harmony ready, cast Rune of Power, Radiant Spark, Touch of the Magi, 4 Arcane Blasts, and a 5th Arcane Blast spellqueued with Arcane Barrage. Then you cast Arcane Orb and use Arcane Missiles until Touch of the Magi drops. From here, you can enter back into the filler rotation until Radiant Spark, Touch of the Magi, and Arcane Power are back off cooldown, and the rotation repeats itself from the Arcane Power burn stage. One thing to note before we move on, what we just covered was the pure single target rotation. At 2 to 6 targets we will actually not want to spellqueue the 5th Barrage in either of our burns. Instead, we want to cast 4 Arcane Blasts, have a slight pause, then Arcane Barrage. I'll have a cheat sheet linked in the description and pinned in the comment section that will cover all target breakpoints, so make sure to check it out. Here's a quick 3-minute segment of me performing the single target rotation on a training dummy. Now let's head into the AoE portion of the guide. We want to begin using the AoE rotation when we reach 4 targets without cooldowns, or 7 targets with cooldowns. Keep in mind that in Mythic Plus, you want to end every pull at 18 stacks of Arcane Harmony so you can immediately enter a burn phase on the next pull. So here's the burn rotation assuming you already have 18 stacks of Arcane Harmony. Depending on if Arcane powers up or not, you'll do the AP burn or the mini burn rotation. Either one will then be followed by 2 Arcane Explosions, Arcane Barrage, Arcane Orb, and Arcane Barrage. From here, you'll be entering the filler rotation. The filler rotation for AoE is going to be using Arcane Explosion to build Arcane charges, and using Arcane Barrage to dump at 4 charges. If you get a clearcasting proc, you want to spend it on Arcane Missiles, unless you're at 8 or more targets, in which you just use the proc on Arcane Explosion and continue dumping Arcane Barrage at 4 charges. Here's a quick 2-minute clip of me doing the AoE burn and filler rotation on a group of training dummies. Keep in mind that in this clip I'm getting multiple burns out, but in a Mythic Plus scenario you'll mostly be alternating between the Arcane Power burn and mini burn between packs. You also want to make sure that as one pack is ending, you begin building 18 stacks of Arcane Harmony to start a burn immediately on the next pack. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask down in the comments. I'm very active there and I try to answer as many questions as possible. If you liked the video, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, and if you're interested in more mage content going into Season 4 and Dragonflight, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.